Hello, everybody. It's Mio, and it's Mio on MMA Time, breaking down the UFC Santos versus Hill card slash Ultimate Fighter finale card slash whatever. A little bit late this time. I'm filming this on a Friday morning. Normally do these on Thursday. It gives more time for people to, utilize this in a betting fashion if you wish. Although this podcast does not condone betting on fighting, there is a solid chance of losing your shirt, and otherwise, just like nerd purposes of breaking down the fights. And what do I think of this card? Well, the main event's pretty interesting. The co-main event is actually pretty good. There's an interesting heavyweight fight between Sakai and Spivak on the card. Lipsky versus Cachoeira has its own appeal. Sam Alvey is on the card, but in about as interesting a fight as you're going to find for Sam Alvey. And my stance on Sam Alvey is pretty well publicized. I think if you think he's a good person or you find him interesting or whatever, that's totally fine. But a UFC caliber fighter at this point in time, he is not. And that's really it. And personally, I do feel like the reason he has had such a long leash with the UFC, so many losses, is that he will publicly defend them against fighter pay critiques. And to me, there's something disingenuous about that, because the UFC has been willing to cut people for, speaking out about fighter pay, and if you are a good company boy, you will get many fights. And as much as that does make some logical sense, I just wish that, fans would have their eyes open on that matter. We got some interesting prospects coming through. Josh Quinlan's pretty intriguing. How is Myro Buena Silva going to handle going up to 135? Terrence McKinney's obviously on the card. Brian Battle, who some people think of as a prospect. Not sure I agree. Is on the card. We did unfortunately lose my boy Misha Serkinov, who was going back up to 205 and was going to be on this card. But his opponent, Shamil Gamzatov, had some visa issues. And similarly, we also lost a fight between Nate Lanoir and Zbara Tukugov due to basically the same thing. Tukugov having visa issues. Now, I do want to touch on this real quick, because after Glory let go of a bunch of their Russian kickboxers, there was a big discussion about that this was some kind of political backdrop to the whole sanctions against Russia in regards to the war in the Ukraine, and that this would be bad for all Russian fighters. And then when Tukugov got removed from this card, those same things came back. Here's the raw facts of the number, or the raw numbers. Tukugov has been in the UFC since 2014, when he debuted against Douglas Da Silva de Andrade, and has fought, I want to say, like one time in the States during that time. During that 8-year stint that has included 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fights, and he's confirmed against Lucas Almeida will be his 9th fight in the UFC. So his debut was in Santa Catarina, Brazil. His next fight was in Stockholm, Sweden. His next fight was in Las Vegas, Nevada. That was the one where he did fight in the UFC, in the States. Who did he fight in the States? He fought Felipe Nover. So the Nover fight was there. Then Curitiba, Brazil. Abu Dhabi. Auckland, New Zealand. Abu Dhabi Fight Island again. Abu Dhabi Fight Island again. And his upcoming fight is again Abu Dhabi Fight Island. The legal issues, the visa issues for Tukhugov and a large number of these Russian fighters pre-existed this. I'm not sure what Tukhugov's specific issue is, but I think there is some kind of familial tie to a terrorist organization. I could be wrong on that, though. Could be mistaken. And additionally, in the case of Gamzatov, who was removed from this card, you also have visa issues dating back to 2018. So, again, a lot of this predates. I'm not saying that the whole anti-Russian stance will not impact Russian fighters, but the fighters that so far are having issues getting fights in the States have always had issues getting fights in the United States. They have always had some level of visa struggles. That's all I'm saying. And then that's your MMA trivia for the day. Let's get on to the card. So in the main event, we got a 205 belt between Thiago Santos, Jamahal Hill. Santos coming in at a plus 220, minus 270 for Jamahal Hill. That feels a little bit wide to me because this is a very winnable fight for Santos. So I am picking Hill. We'll get that out of the way. Picking him by decision. But I have gone him back and forth on the fight a couple times. So here's the thing about Jamahal Hill. Fast guy. Super physically imposing. Good power. Good reach. Excellent reach. I think he has some of the longest reach in the division with the exception of like Johnny Walker. And actually does have a pretty well put together boxing game. Offensively speaking. He throws with some variety. He'll change up the speeds a little bit. He can both throw straight punches and get you fixated on that and come around with looping power. Very nice. Obviously, has had a really solid run lately. And the only loss is to Paul Craig, which was, of course, a submission loss. Not something that Santos really does. At least not from bottom. Santos does have some top options for that, but he doesn't have the wrestling game to really make that happen. So, like, the way that Hill has lost in the past, not really at play here. And also that loss to Craig was more or less just a fight IQ failure for him. I've referenced it a couple of times. Like, he just was like, oh, I almost got caught in an armbar. Go right back in that guard. And obviously, that danger isn't present with Santos. Hopefully he's learned from that. But there is a major question for me here, and that is that Hill has not really had to deal with a persistent kicking threat before. And Santos will kick the legs, will kick the body, and do it with a lot of power. One of the best at that in the division. And a guy who, of course, has beaten the likes of Jimmy Manuwa, Jan Blachowicz, Anthony Smith, Kevin Holland, all guys who have elements of Jamahal Hill's game, although Hill has things that are missing from each of them. Admittedly, at the end of the day, the problem is, of course, Santos 1-4 in his last 5. Yes, the losses are to Ankalaev, Rakic, Glover, and John Jones. The win is over Johnny Walker. Walker is the most similar to Hill. But Walker himself is going through this like kind of weird transition phase where, frankly, I don't think he's going to be good for like a really long time. I think he's at the wrong gym to develop the kind of style that he wants to. I think he's gone with flashover substance kind of again, like, because of course Walker's whole style was flashover substance. And now he's at a gym that probably really won't address that. That is more famous for, creating Conor McGregor and essentially nothing else. I don't know if he's still with SBG Ireland, but like the fact that that was even a thought of his indicates, I think, a flaw in personal reflection of what he's actually lacking as a fighter. And Santos is pretty much incapable of leading at this point. Whether it's a confidence thing or it's a body breaking down thing, I'm not entirely sure which. It's probably a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, honestly. That he existed at such a high level of physical stature that even though he is still really physical, he doesn't feel comfortable being the fighter he once was. So he's become low output and almost entirely reliant on countering and not being exactly willing to pull the trigger very easily. And that's why I'm picking Hill. I just think that if you give Hill the initiative, you give Hill the volume, and you give Hill the reach, because he does have, I want to say, 2-inch reach advantage. 3 inches, actually, 79 inches to 76 inches. You're giving Hill all the required things that he needs to probably win. That doesn't mean that Santos can't catch him, because Santos absolutely can catch him. There's a lot of countering opportunities to be had when it comes to Jamahal Hill, because he overextends on his punches and throws with ludicrous power almost kind of all the time. Hasn't really developed a great deal of defensive acumen, and is there, I think, to be leg kicked and body kicked. But I can't trust Santos to actually just do enough. Can't trust that. I'm not sure if I trust Hill to actually knock him out. Hill's track record of knocking people out is excellent. I mean, 2-minute 55-second knockout of Johnny Walker, knocked out Jimmy Crute, knocked out OSP, who is actually pretty hard to finish. But also, as we mentioned, 2020 went the distance with, Darko Stosic. I think this probably goes the distance. And at the end of the day, it's just the lack of activity that will cost Santos. Co-main event is a banger between Vicente Luque and Geoff Neal. Luque a minus 170 favorite, plus 145. It's interesting that Neal is a smaller underdog than Santos is, because I think there's a lot. I think there's a dynamic to the fight that Santos can win, whereas I don't really think there's a dynamic to Hill's fight, or to this fight with Neal, that actually results in a win for him. So the problem with Neal is that, let's get to the good stuff. Neal has fast hands. He has power. He has actually some pretty interesting combinations when he goes deeper into them. Will work in some nice uppercuts and so on. But he's very one note and one speed. And by one note, I mean one. He really only goes to the head. There's virtually no leg work, no body work to Geoff Neal's game. So everything can essentially be seen coming. Everything is essentially thrown at the same speed. And he will be pretty predictable with his combinations with just kind of crisp, effective, fast 1-2s. But you would have to think that a striker of the acumen of Vicente Luque will at some point start to see those patterns and shut them down. Is there a path to victory for Neal? Obviously, there's the knockout. And there is the fact that Vicente Luque functions way more on the margins than he probably should. Like, if you think back to any fight Vicente Luque has had, be it the Brian Barberena fight, be it the Mike Perry fight, whatever, these are all fights that, when you think about Vicente Luque's skill set on paper, it feels like he should dominate. It feels like he should go out there and really just handle his business, yet they turn into wars because he's not going to play to his strengths necessarily. Well, he plays to his strengths, but he plays to his strengths without any regard for what the strengths of the other fighter are. And that's why this will be a banger fight, because he's going to give Hands of Steel the fight that he wants. It's just that Geoff Neal doesn't really have the check marks to beat Vicente Luque. What beats Vicente Luque? Good pressure wrestling, good threat of a takedown, mixing striking with takedowns, or the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson approach of staying at range, being elusive, and handling your business that way. And Neal has neither of those. It's not that Neal can't get takedowns, but they're not a persistent part of his game. And then they're not at the level of a Bilal Muhammad, for example. Probably actually relatively close to Michael Graves, but Michael Graves is way more persistent about it. And I think Luque was a notably worse fighter at that time, or at least notably worse at dealing with those type of questions. So if Neal's going to go out there, be predictable, admittedly get the fight that he's effective in, which is a pocket striking battle, I just trust Luque to be more varied, to be a little bit more technical, to just have more ideas and pick up the win that way. Not that I'm saying that the plus 145 underdog should be larger, but it's just interesting that, like, in a fight between Hill and Santos, where you have one proven fighter and one very unproven fighter, though the gap is wide enough to be, 500 or so? And in this one, we're really, really tight, despite the fact that, like, Neal's not had exactly the greatest run lately in the UFC. 1-2 in his last 3, lost to Neil Magny and Stephen Thompson. His biggest win is still... Well, I guess the key is that he did beat Bilal Muhammad. But, like, it's a completely different dynamic with that fight. Otherwise, his biggest win is a really aging out of the game Santiago Ponzinibbio. Not necessarily aging because, aging, Ponzinibbio is 35, and also the fact that the Pons has had some considerable health issues. So we reached the first Ultimate Fighter finale fight. I'm surprised at the betting odds here. Minus 235 for Zach Pauga, plus 200 for Muhammad Usman. I just thought that Usman would get the name recognition. He is not Kamaru Usman by any means, but we have seen the overrating of MMA siblings in the past. There's still a very much bump on, like, Antonina Shevchenko, for example, that does not remotely resemble her skills. Like, on almost any betting line that you can get on her. Like, betting against Antonina Shevchenko is almost always a good idea. I was kind of expecting Usman to have the advantage here. He's also a lot bigger. He's like he's a legitimate heavyweight, and Pauga's not. Pauga's a 205er. I didn't watch Tough, so there's probably something that explains this via the performance on Tough. Maybe Pauga looked really, really good. Maybe. I don't know. And the reason I don't watch Tough is simply this. Number one, I think the concept is outdated because it used to actually be a really good idea. Like, I watched the UFC and MMA in general before the Tough boom, before the Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell season, the Ultimate Fighter with Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner, and so on. But that did deepen my ability to watch because, number one, it kind of launched into the Spike era, which meant that as a teenager, I didn't have to ask for mom and dad's credit card to watch the fights anymore. There was the option to watch for free. And it also gave more of an insight into the fighters and made you emotionally invest in guys further down the card, which was something that had not been done previously really at all because there hadn't really been a spotlight shined on anything. There were a couple of exceptions to this. Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler, mid-card fighters who had somewhat of a cult of personality to a certain degree. But for the most part, not really. If you weren't fighting for a belt, you didn't get a lot of promotion. So that was a good idea. The problem is that we've long since run out of, like, successful Ultimate Fighter seasons. We get it, like, for example, when they brought in the strawweight division and when they brought in the flyweight division. Excellent ideas, actually, at that point. Because it allowed you to build up a number of stars who were actually going to stay around for a while. Because, like, a number of them still are around. But at this point, with Dana White Contender Series largely being a way to get a better contract for less time investment, that's where you're going to get your actual talents coming through. There aren't really a lot of prospects. Now, I say that Pauga's not a bad prospect. Usman's not a bad prospect for different reasons. The only thing that really causes me that I hadn't even really considered is that Pauga's 34 years old and thus is probably a finished product, and it's still very bare bones. But anyways, we've had my anti-UFC or anti-Tough rant, and the other thing I will add is that fighting on Tough is cutting weight multiple times in a relatively short period of time. You're not, if you've watched the fighters before Tough, you get a better idea of what they're about than when they're in the house. Because, for example, I think Eduardo Perez, who lost to Usman on the show, probably actually is a better prospect than any of them. But I think he was also cutting weight on the show, which we know the weight cut is a battle. And on The Ultimate Fighter, it's that much more of a battle because you're fighting multiple times, making weight multiple times in a very short period of time. That's incredibly different prep than what you're going to have in the UFC or what you had before the UFC. So it's how they perform beforehand that I think is way more indicative of how they will fight. All right, let's get to this fight. I actually think Pauga is a better fighter just in general. Like, it's a bare bones style, but there is a reasonable level of physicality to it. There's a well-rounded skill set to it. He counters well. He establishes jab well. The only problem I see for him specific to this fight is, one, the size. But two, if you remember his fight before the Ultimate Fighter against Marcus Perez, Perez was able to establish the clinch really easily. And keep in mind, Perez is a middleweight coming up to 205 for that fight, and a guy who has not historically shown the greatest of, not necessarily fight IQ, but fight awareness. Like, Perez is the guy who's convinced himself that he's a kung fu fighter while actually being a BJJ fighter. And he was able to get the clinch and actually do a lot with it, even in a losing effort. And I just kind of think Usman can do that. Usman has his own tragic set of problems that I think are actually harder to overcome. I think he's a dramatically awkward and uncomfortable fighter. He's a guy who has terrible footwork that is janky as all heck, and even sometimes looks like he's looking at his feet. And he's a guy who has been taught, quote unquote, the right basic concepts without the technique or the fluidity to actually pull them off, but is trying to do so anyways. It's going to get him uppercut knocked out at some point, but he is reasonably athletic for a big man. He's not huge or anything, weighs in around 240 pounds, but he is the bigger man, and I'm having a hard time looking past that, having seen that Pauga doesn't really avoid the clinch. And as much as Usman is not really a wrestler at all, like he doesn't have a wrestling background as far as I can tell. His background is football. He does have the right physicality and the right ideas to make a clinch wrestling game work. So I'm picking him here by unanimous decision, even though I do think Pauga is the more UFC ready product. It's just, one, at a weight class below. Two, that's really it, actually. I guess two is, I don't think that there's any kind of like heavy level creativity or deep nuanced technique that will confuse Usman at the hands of Pauga. Juliana Miller, Brogan Walker, this is the other one. I mean, case in point here, we have a 2-1 fighter who is a disaster in Juliana Miller, making the finals of this tournament against Brogan Walker, who herself, aside from a win over Miranda Maverick, is not exactly someone who's going to make a lot of noise in the UFC. Like, there's no indication that she herself is anything more than like someone who would come in, have a couple of fights, maybe win a fight or two, and then probably fade out in like, I don't know, 6 to 8 fights from the UFC. And these two are the best that you had on the season, apparently. There's a lot I like about Miller. Like, she's fearless. She has the raw mental aptitude for fighting, that fearlessness, that willingness to push, that willingness to just be pathologically aggressive And you can't teach that. So I mean that is a legitimately big bonus. The problem is that there's not really a lot of athleticism tied to that at all. And on top of that, you do also have the problem that her striking is a hot mess technically. And while she does have a pretty good jiu-jitsu game, 10th planet jiu-jitsu, what do you expect? It's very submission over position, and it's not really tied to any kind of particularly good takedown or reliable takedown game. And Brogan Walker, reasonably physical fighter, has functional stand-up. I wouldn't call it good, but it is functional. And again, a clinch game that was good enough to ride with Miranda Maverick, who is a beast. So, Brogan Walker by decision, and both of these girls probably aren't going to have a tremendous amount of success in the UFC. I guess the question with Miller is that she's 26 years old, she's 2-1. If she gets with a good gym, which Team Hurricane Awesome is not a bad gym by any means, but gets to a gym that actually molds her into something functional, maybe there's something there. I just think that she's hard capped at the ceiling, and she's the favorite in this fight. Like, again, this is the problem with Tough, that we had a whole season, and this is what you came up with. Minus 140 for Miller, plus 120 on Walker. I'm not putting any money down on this card myself. There's some real-life financial questions that are going to keep me from doing any betting for the foreseeable future. But this would be one where I would put money down on Walker. That's an underdog that shouldn't be the case. Augusto Sakai, Sergey Spivak. I hate to be particularly reductive with this fight, but like a lot of Sergey Spivak's fights are going to come down to the following question. What happens when they clinch up? Does he take him down, or does he get neutralized in the clinch? And I'm not 100% certain that Sakai, having been confronted with his own mortality, so to speak, with getting finished 3 times in the last, how long has it been? Last 3 fights, 3 times in about 2 years. And having last one against Blago Ivanov, what does that do to a man psychologically? Because it's one thing to be hurt, to feel pain, and it's another thing when your entire game has been based around being tough and being able to outlast an opponent durability-wise, to find out that that's actually not always going to be a path to victory for you. And I'm kind of at the point where, despite Sakai having lost to really, 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 really good fighters, like top cream of the crop heavyweights, I'm having a hard time picturing what his wins look like at this point. And I do think that Spivak is a guy who has a good enough striking game that he's not just a wrestler, that he can keep Sakai busy with the hands, get him down, and I don't know if he finishes him, but win the fight. That's what I'm going with. There's, of course, the weird thing that, like, Sakai not too long ago beat Marcin Tybura, who beat Spivak, but the genesis of those 2 fights are just really, really different. And, I just think that Tybura is a nightmare matchup for Spivak, and I think Sakai is a nightmare matchup for Tybura. So I think that's all I'm chalking that down to. I'm taking Spivak here. He is the favorite at minus 210, plus 180 coming back on Sakai. Ariane Lipsky versus Priscilla Cachoeira. I'm probably never going to pick Cachoeira to fight. There's the fact that I object to her just as a person. We've seen her try to eye gouge her opponent. We've seen some things about... I'm not going to pass judgment on any of the allegations in regards to her domestic life. because we don't know. It's we probably never will know because of Brazil's lack of legal procedure with this kind of thing. But like her defense to the whole thing is still the I get tested by USADA, therefore your allegations are false because you're accusing me of using drugs, and the drugs she's accused of using um, are not ones that out of competition anyways get tested by USADA. So it's one of those using USADA as a defense for something that USADA doesn't really do. Anyways, I don't. I find it odious. And then there's also just in the cage the fact that there's not really a lot of ways for Cachoeira to win fights. She's incredibly tough. She's reasonably large and strong for the weight class. But she probably lost to Jeon Kim, which was her last win. And her other two wins are over Shayna Dobson, who honestly probably just should not have been in the UFC at any point, and Gina Mazzani, who is like the lowest physical grade that should be in the UFC. And otherwise, it's getting absolutely wrecked by Valentina Shevchenko. No shame in that. But losing a pretty convincing decision to Molly McCann, losing to Liana Carolina, and kind of just getting thrown around by Jillian Robertson. Lipski is not any of those fighters in terms of what she does. Although Lipski does seem to be like progressing actually pretty well. She used to be a complete hot mess, and I still think we will see the complete hot mess that is Ariane Lipski's fighting style in this fight, because Cachoeira is going to brawl with her, is going to try to suck her into a brawl, and I think Lipski will probably engage. But Lipski does have some fundamental Muay Thai developments going on. Showed it against Mandy Baum. She's also, I think, a quicker fighter. Not necessarily more athletic, because it depends on what we're talking about, because I think probably Cachoeira is the stronger of the two. But Lipski has more fast twitch muscle, more speed, more accuracy, more coordination, more creativity. I just think she takes her apart. And probably the only thing is, of course, like calling someone to finish Cachoeira is really, really hard. And we have not seen Lipski's finishing abilities translate to the UFC. Losing to JoJo Wood, losing to Molly McCann by decision, not being able to finish Isabella Padua, I think is how you say it. Yes, she did knee bar Luana Carolina, but Luana Carolina is herself a physically impressive fighter with very little to back it up, and then couldn't finish Mandy Baum is concerning. So probably decision. It'll probably be a fun, messy fight though. So kind of looking forward to it. But it does feel like if Lipski loses to Cachoeira, it's very condemning of her skills and would suggest some major problems. Not necessarily a hype derailment, because I think the hype around Lipski already more or less got derailed when she lost her first two UFC fights. But this kind of slightly reborn, slightly recuperating Lipski, only 28, there's time. But yeah, this should be a fight that she wins easily. Michael Oleksiejczuk versus Sam Alvey. The good sides to this. Sam Alvey is going to get the type of fight that is at least fun. Oleksiejczuk's going to come forward. He's going to be there to be hit. He will probably actually get hurt at some point in this fight by Sam Alvey, because Sam Alvey does hit really hard, does have a natural sense of countering and timing. His problem has always been that he can't really bring out the counters in other people. Like he's missing the part of the game that baits people into opening the door for counters. And he's physically fading. We've seen him get hurt in situations where he normally wouldn't get hurt. We've seen him get finished in situations, but he normally wouldn't get finished. This kind of reminds me of the Julian Marquez fight that he had, where it was like, this is the fight you want, and go out there and try and have it and get it done. Now, there is a big question mark with Oleksiejczuk. This, I think, is the first time he's gone down to 185. I don't predict any problems with that. He's always been a small 205er. It always felt like 185 was a better home for him. And he goes to the body. He's versatile. He changes targets. He throws a lot. And he's not reliant on wrestling and clinching with Alvey, which Alvey is surprisingly good at neutralizing. And if they do clinch, I think it just opens up the body for Oleksiejczuk to work. So I'm going with Oleksiejczuk to finish him by TKO. In a fun fight, I do think it will be fun. It's not the outside striking game or he doesn't have the outside striking game tools that normally actually do exceptionally limit Sam Alvey. And it looks like the betting odds are with me here because minus 550 for Oleksiejczuk. Is he the biggest favorite on the card and plus 400? Actually, I think the biggest favorite on the card is the fight we're going to talk about here in a second. But I think he's the second biggest favorite on the card. So there you go. Not exactly groundbreaking to say that Sam Alvey, a guy who is 7-1 in his last 8 fights, is probably going to lose and hasn't won a fight cleanly since 2018 against Marcin Prachnio, which is kind of the tailor-made fight for him to actually still win. Terrence McKinney versus Eric Ghost Pepper Gonzalez. I like the nickname. Minus 900 is way too deep a line on McKinney. Plus 600 back on the other way up for Gonzalez. Don't get me wrong. McKinney should win this fight. McKinney should win most fights that he has from this point onwards for a bit because he's got all the physical ability you would want in the world, actually has some good technical ideas, both on the feet and as a wrestler. Like, there's a lot here. There is a lot here, in all seriousness. The problem is there is also a tendency to get caught because there's not a lot of regard for defense. And we've seen that happen. I mean, he did just lose to Drew Dober in a fight that he was winning. But more concerning is like a loss to Derek Minner. Derek Minner is a similarly balls out one-round fighter who's only going to do one thing, essentially, which is try to choke you. And that worked against Terrence McKinney. So, like, there is no one that I would take him as a minus 900 favorite against. Like, minus 900 is huge. Like, that's Valentina Shevchenko versus the division numbers. I want to say, actually, hang on. So we were talking about how Valentina Shevchenko fought Priscilla Cachoeira. What was the betting line on that? What was the close on that? Minus 1,000. Okay, so Terrence McKinney is a slightly smaller favorite than Valentina Shevchenko versus Priscilla Cachoeira. That's a tough one. Gonzalez he's a game fighter. He's someone who is willing to brawl, willing to throw. He's a scrappy guy. He has nothing that makes me actually think he'll beat McKinney. Like, if McKinney loses this fight, it's because McKinney beats himself. So TKO, McKinney first round. Takeshi Sato versus Brian Battle. This is Brian Battle's first fight at 170, I do believe. So he's coming down in weight. He's a fairly large guy for the division. 77-inch reach, 6'1" height. You know, compared to 5'10", 73 inches here for Sato. So has the size, has the reach, has the activity because, of course, Sato is a super low output counter fighter. But like, this is kind of the classic thing where, like, Battle won his season in the Ultimate Fighter. I don't think anyone's excited about him. I don't think the UFC is excited about him because, I mean, here he is, fourth fight of the night on a card that isn't exactly stacked with name value. Like, all the fights have been interesting in their own way, but in terms of name value, are not fantastic. Still taking Battle here. I will always have a hard time picking Takeshi Sato just because there's so much of his game relies on the opponent making just mistakes and him being able to capitalize off it. And he is good at that, but the guys he has beaten, Jason Witt, who we're going to talk about in a second, and Ben Saunders in the UFC are, for different reasons, kind of on the way out the door. And I have to take Battle by decision. Just volume striking, ability to get that done. It should be on the cards. Hang on a second here. What was the betting odds on this one? Everyone likes the betting odds. Plus 190 for Sato, minus 225 for Battle. That's probably a little bit wide, because I think if there's a finish in this fight, it comes from Sato. I think Sato has the potential to hurt him, and I don't honestly really think Battle has the same. I just think that Battle probably can just outwork him. He's bigger, stronger, presumably, and get the job done that way. Jason Witt versus Josh Quinlan. I am not the biggest believer in Josh Quinlan. Like, I think there's a lot of potential there. I think there's a lot of inherent physicality. I think there's good power. I think there's good accuracy. I think there's a good feel for striking. I think there is a fairly well-rounded game. So there's a lot of things I think actually do work. But I really did not like what I saw in his fight before the Dana White Contender Series fight. And the Dana White Contender Series fight didn't really convince me of much because he did actually test positive for PEDs afterwards. You would think that would null the contract, actually. Realistically, you would think that. The UFC should probably do that. I don't like that when he faces adversity, he doesn't seem to really have answers for it. Like Dallas, let me get his name right here. Dallas Jennings is the guy he fought. He was 3-1 coming into that fight, and I don't think has won a fight since. And is not a particularly imposing physical specimen. Is not a particularly good fighter, just in general. He does have one win actually after that, to a guy who was 7-8 coming in. But when he just got aggressive and started changing things up, Quinlan actually really had a hard time dealing with it. He eventually finished him anyways, but that fight went really way deeper than it probably should have. And like, what is Jason Witt if not a kind of way better version of Dallas Jennings? Like a guy who actually has a little bit of physicality, wrestling talent, some punching power, some staying power, a decent gym behind him in Glory MMA and Fitness. I'm going with Jason Witt. Like, I have my own concerns. Witt can be hurt, can be chin checked. Quinlan does have power. I'm not sold on Quinlan. I'm open to it. The bare bricks, the bare foundation is there. And I think we're going to learn a fair bit from this fight. I just don't think there is, and it's not a hard thing because I don't think he's disheartened by the fact that Jennings, for example, fought back against him. That's not the read I had. It's just physically, technically, he is used to guys just kind of wilting in front of him. And the question of what happens when they just don't hasn't been explored fully enough for Quinlan to go deeper into fights and come up with solutions. Like, just eventually, Jennings just didn't have anything for him. I think Witt will. I think Witt is a higher profile of fighter than Jennings. Obviously, he's in the UFC. He's got 27 fights. He's a more physical, more athletic fighter as well. I do think he gets the job done here. He's coming in plus 180 to minus 220 on Quinlan. I don't mind that, honestly. Like, Quinlan's got some hype behind him. I expected him to be a favorite. Minus 220, I think, is a little bit too much. But it's not ridiculous. Like, that McKinney line kind of makes everything else look pretty respectable. Corey McKenna versus Miranda Granger. I have questions about McKenna. And the Elise Reed fight kind of highlighted a lot of them. The problem with McKenna is that I think the fighter she wants to be is not a fighter she can be. She wants to be, it seems to me, a slick boxer. She wants to enter the pocket, get out of the pocket. And it's not the technical aspects that are the problem. It's raw physicality because she's 5'3" with a 58.5-inch reach. For comparison purposes, Granger, who admittedly is a very big girl for this weight class, like one of the bigger strawweights, is 5'7" with a 68-inch reach. There's only so far you can go with a slick boxing game with less than 60 inches of reach. I'm hoping Team Alpha Male, who McKenna is apparently training with, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, beat that out of her. Because I think her striking has to mate with her wrestling game. I think she has to be a pressure fighter just because physically she doesn't have the tools to be anything else. She cannot go the route of Cynthia Calvillo, essentially. I don't think she's going the route of Cynthia Calvillo because I think her boxing game looks way better than Calvillo's. But she needs to realize that at 23 years old, she has a lot of time to develop and everything, but it has to still go in a pathway that suits her own physical limitations and go out there and get the job done. Because she has the physical ability to beat Miranda Granger. Granger is not super physically imposing. She's just kind of big, kind of just a bully. And she's there to be wrestled. Like, if Ashley Yoder can crash the clinch and take you down, I guarantee you Corey McKenna can do the same. And probably do it with a lot more striking setup because Yoder's striking game is pretty damn terrible. So I'm picking McKenna. I'm picking her to win a decision here. But I'm nervous that if she comes out and fights kind of similar to how she fought Elise Reed, that as much as Elise Reed is a way more impressive fighter in this regard because she has distance keeping tools and Granger does not, that she'll lose. By the way, Granger needs to get to a new camp and like do something. She trains at a place called Charlie's Combat Club, which I recognize that Sally Krumdiak trained there, and like she's just kind of a MMA pioneer. Like, there's nothing else there. Please go find another gym because there's a lot to work with there. Like, just the frame alone should have Granger ask more questions than she does. McKenna via, I think I said decision. I think I'm probably going to stick with it because McKenna actually has not had a finish in the UFC. Granted, the two girls she did beat, Vanessa Demopoulos and Kay Hansen, ask a lot more questions than Granger does. So, like, this could be that first one, but Granger's only been finished by Amanda Lemos. So I am going to go with Corey McKenna by decision. She's the minus 225 favorite, coming back at a plus 175 dog for Miranda Granger. Mauro Bueno Silva is going up to 135 to fight Stephanie Edgar. Or Edgar, pardon me. I think you have to go with Silva here. Edgar's game, what's good about it is actually pretty interesting. Like, she has a crafty clinch game, and Silva probably will give her the chance to use that. She does have a crafty armbar game. She has, I don't want to compare every judo girl to Ronda Rousey because that's not accurate. But like she has the prototype Ronda Rousey game, which is I'm good at the clinch, I'm good at snagging arms, not really good at anything else. Only really strikes with one hand at a time. There's no concept of combination to her punching, and there's no concept of like the other hand when she's throwing. Like it's all lefts or all rights. Like her stand-up game is kind of broken, and her ability to actually even like manage distance is kind of broken. Like she should have lost to Jessica Rose Clark. I can't emphasize enough how stupid that was. Yes, she did beat Shanna Young, but she also lost to Tracy Cortez. Cortez's game is not entirely different to Mayra Bueno Silva's, and also Cortez is a flyweight who was fighting at bantamweight. Silva's a flyweight going up to bantamweight. So there's a great deal of parallels there. Silva is a physical freak. Like, honestly, the physicality of Mayra Bueno Silva is absolutely top notch. If she could start backing that up with like any kind of really thought out technical game, it would probably be better. Because I mean, like if she had she is the better striker of the two, but like if she had a reliable striker only game, I'd probably take her to just bash Edgar to pieces. But I think she's going to run into the clinch, and Edgar's going to put enough of a scare into her that we're probably going to go to a decision, because Silva's game is so ad hoc and messy that I don't think she actually finishes Edgar. But Cortez was able to stay out of trouble with her. Silva should be able. Silva is a good grappler, and it feels like if you're a good grappler, a strong fighter, and someone who can at least present something on the feet and not fall into an armbar, you should beat Stephanie Edgar or Edgar. I don't know why I always want to say Edgar. When I'm talking about her, it could be The Boys character Stan Edgar doing this to me, or it could be Frankie Edgar, probably. It's Edgar, like an egg with an ER on the end. Betting line minus 140 on Silva, plus 120 on Edgar. That's about right. Yeah, like Silva's coming up a weight class and doesn't have necessarily the greatest resume. Like, yes, beating Yanan Wu's cool, but like, actually, armbarring Julian Robertson is actually pretty good. Like the fact that she has 2 wins by armbar in her own right over in the UFC, plus 1 in a recent grappling match. Like, she understands armbars enough. We should see this get done, and her only losses are to Marina Moroz and Manon Fiorot, both of whom will employ a completely different game plan to what Stephanie Edgar does. So there you go. Those are the fights. Once again, check out the links below. There's the Discord, there's social media bits, and so on. The Discord is probably the most interesting thing because, number one, it kind of all brings everything together, but it does bring up the whole MMA simulator, the ability to be just a giant colossal fight nerd with me if you want to be. So there is that. And what is the next UFC card? What is it? So I got Santos Hill. That's the one we just broke down. What's next? Chito Vera versus Dominic Cruz. I'm looking forward to that fight, but not much else on that card. Not much else. David Onama's on the card. He's always fun. But not much else. Oh, God. Charlie Ontiveros is still in the UFC. We'll leave it there. We'll leave it there. Check me out on social media, Discord, the links below. This podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, and Acast. Check it out. It's good fun. And, I mean, you're here already. You made it to this part of the video. You might as well go deeper.